And I am done. Okay, so I just finished up listening to Gates of Fire by Steven Pressfield. And I want to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing the book, which was just right now. So I really like this book. This is probably a 4 out of 5, maybe a 4.5 out of 5. This is a really good book. And before we go too much into it, I want to point out that yes, this is not a fantasy book. And this is a historical fiction book. And rest assured, this is not going to be like my new norm. I'm not totally switching up what kind of books that I'm reading, but there are a few different series and a few different books that I want to be reading here that are in the historical fiction genre that I'm really excited to read, that I want to go back, some of like the all-time greats. And it is very different from fantasy, but for whatever reason, there does appear to be a very large crossover between fantasy fans and historical fiction fans. I don't really know what it is. If you know what the answer, shoot me a comment here down below. But yeah, for some reason, there's a huge amount of people that read both of these things. And when I see a lot of my friends be reviewing some of these books, it's got me really excited to read them. So this is my first into that foray. And if you're not familiar with what this story is, this is a retelling of the Battle of Thermopylae. And the Battle of Thermopylae became very famous to the average person when the movie 300 came out, probably, I don't know, 18 years ago or so. And this is a story of the Spartans and a very famous battle that they had with the Persians. And it took place at Thermopylae. And this was a battle where the Persians were coming in, they wanted to take over Europe, and they were starting with Greece. And they had such an enormous army, hundreds of thousands of people large, that there was only one place that would make sense for them to cross over. Because if you're familiar with northern Greece, it's a huge mountain range. And there's one obvious spot that you can come through from the east. And it takes place right here. And so the Greeks decided to hold up on this very narrow pass with very few people. The movie, it makes it seem like it's 300. 300 was the amount of Spartans that were in this battle, but there was about 7,000 total people, but the Spartans were really the core of this army. And they went up versus, there's a lot of different numbers here, but the one that I keep hearing is 300,000 Persians against 7,000 Greeks. And the Greeks lost, spoiler alert, but if you've seen the movie and you know about these events, I feel like I can say some spoilers here because it's a very commonly known thing. But they held them off in a very heroic last stand. And, you know, I liked so many things about this story. And let me start with the way this story is told. And in a very kind of classic historical fiction way, it's not told through the lens of the main actor in this event. And the main actor here would be King Leonidas. And he's the king of the Spartans. And that is where the movie 300 centers around, as this main character. And movies tend to do that. Movies very often will pick the most important character and make that the center point. But a lot of these historical fictions, they go into the more common soldier. In this case, it's way down in the caste system. And this is through a servant to the army, not even somebody that participated in the battle. And I love that when these books do that, when you get to see things on a much more granular level. And it's not so much about the high politics, but oftentimes these characters get sucked in to the higher politics, but you get to see things from the common soldier perspective. And it makes things so much more real and gives you, through the historical fiction lens, a very historical accurate portrayal of the way that things were for a group of people. And even though, you know, a lot of the things have to make some assumptions here that the person who wrote this down, I think it was Plutarch, was accurate. But what is accurate is a lot of the way that the army modeled itself after, and the way that they portrayed themselves and trained and all of these things, which is wonderful. And not only was it this common soldier, but I also love, and I've always been a sucker for this framing narrative. And a framing narrative, I think the best way to describe it is, and when the story is being told to somebody else, and the character will sometimes go to that more modern times or the more forward future time where they're telling it to somebody, but then they'll jump back into this is what happened when I was there. In this case, you have this servant, 𝐀𝐮𝐤𝐢𝐻, I think I'm saying that right, and he is having to give his story to the Persian emperor, to Xerxes. And because Xerxes wants to know what's it like to be a Spartan? What made these people so heroic? And so Ximenes is telling not just the story of them, but his life story as well. And it feels a little forced at times because, why would the Persian emperor care about this level of detail? But I did find it interesting, and I liked that fairly frequent jumping back and forth thing that often happens in these framing narratives, and it made it a lot of fun. And quite frankly, my favorite parts of this book were the parts that talked about Ximenes and his childhood, his very traumatic childhood with getting, his whole village massacred and him having to go on the run and deciding to join up with the Spartans to avenge his family. And it's very compelling stuff. And I love the very long kind of training montage where he's learning, what it's like to be a Spartan and what makes them so special and how do they train and all those things. I just get sucked up into that level of the story. And it worked so perfectly for me. Now, then the actual Battle of Thermopylae happens. It's a 3-day long battle. And it's a very bloody affair. And Steven Pressfield very clearly knows how to write good battle sequences. But strangely enough, the battle itself was my least favorite part of the story. I think that Pressfield wrote it very well, but, it's not the most entertaining battle in the world. There's not, all these flanking maneuvers and all these really intricate parts of the battle. It's really the Greeks lining up in a phalanx and holding themselves against this line. And there's some more detail to this. With the most fun parts of this battle was the massive amount of casualties here and what that was like, literally battling on top of people that have been slain, in mountains of the dead, that people are climbing over. And it's very visual and visceral and very entertaining to read. And I haven't read many stories that were like this. And it was the parts of the battle that were the most compelling was especially that third day where the Greeks are just getting worn out. They've told their allies to leave. They're going to just finish this battle by themselves. And, even though they've been holding themselves, clearly Xerxes is just going to send wave after wave after wave, not let them to have any rest, and will break through this line. Now, while that wasn't my favorite part, I still really did enjoy it. The part that the story really fell apart for me was the very end of this story. And so it largely succeeded up to this point and made me want to give this book like a 4 out of 5. But the ending just ended up feeling rushed. It felt like this book could have been so much longer because, the conflict itself lasted way longer than the Battle of Thermopylae. And you had such a good excuse to go into the level of detail here. And if you're not familiar, essentially what happens is the Greeks have this last stand. They lose. Xerxes pours through with his army into Greece. They make it very far into Greece and eventually get repelled, in part because of a very large naval battle and some very good luck by the Greeks. And Xerxes was worried that his army was going to get cut off. So he retreated, left a corps that ended up fighting, I believe, the next year, and just got walloped and ended up leaving for good. And they were not able to mass the amount of people to be able to redo this. The Greeks had prepared. They got a huge coalition of people together to fight them off and ended up very much winning that next battle. That's what happens. And I wanted more details about that because, you're very invested in the success of the Greeks here. And just to have this Thermopylae battle, which is very heroic and fun to read about, the core of what happens just gets kind of glossed over. And that's unfortunate for me because in reality, even though this book wants to portray like this battle was what caused the Greeks to eventually win, that's not really true. I mean, and there's some debate about this with historical scholars, but I think the most common perspective is that it didn't really do a lot. The Greeks still would have won even if this battle never happened. But what it was a story of courage and, how heroic and a good example of what these Spartans were really like. And the book kind of, for entertainment purposes, made it seem like it was bigger than it really was. And that was a little bit unfortunate for me for a book that felt, at least for somebody that's not a scholar in this, but I do know a decent about, more than probably the average person, it came off like a little bit of untrue. But, that's just me, and maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I think I kind of do. But ultimately, though, this was a great book, and I would recommend it to pretty much anybody. The writing is a little bit militaristic in that it can get very cut and dry, and I like that kind of thing. I love reading history. I love reading just history books that are not telling a story, that are not, a first-person perspective in these events. I'm very happy to just pick up a history book and learn about events, and so for somebody like me, it was great. And I think even people that aren't like that will still get great enjoyment out of this, especially if you're kind of predisposed to liking, Greek culture. I happen to be Greek, so I'm a little bit predisposed to that. Or have always been fascinated by this battle and to learn more about it. It's very fun. Now, I listened to this on audio, and I want to talk to you about the audio experience. The narrator here, I don't know his name, but he does an extremely good job. I would recommend this audiobook. In fact, I think I'd recommend the audio above the physical version. And the physical version is always great, but I'm always looking for excuses to listen to audiobooks, because so many fantasy books that I listen to are kind of unlistenable because of how detailed they are. And you would just get lost, at least for me. I don't have the perfect memory. I like to read things and refer to notes and look back and forth and being able to flip back pages. You can't really do that in an audiobook. You can save your spot, you can do some of that, but on like an epic fantasy that has tons of named characters, it gets very difficult. Now, this book's not like that. I breezed through this in audio. I got through it in a pretty short amount of time, and it was very easy to listen to. And with a good narrator, I would highly recommend this. Now, if you want to listen to this in audiobook and you do not have an Audible account, I am sponsored by Audible, and you can get a free book, or two if you're a Prime member, by going to audibletrial.com/Matt. I'll leave a link below in the description. But check it out. It helps me out, helps you out. And if you do have an Audible account, great for you. I have one too, and I'd suggest you check this one out. So that is my review. It's a great book. Check it out. I think you'll enjoy it. So thank you so much for giving me the time, and as always, happy reading to you.